the EU-Belarus relations, where we will try to answer the question, is there a chance to break the vicious circle? Let me first of all introduce our distinguished guests who will be speaking on the panel today. So we will have Dr. Andrew Wilson, the Senior Policy Fellow from the European Council on Foreign Relations. We also have the pleasure of having Dr. Sergey Kizima with us, the international relations expert from Minsk. We also have Yauheni Preiherman, the policy director for the Center for Analytical Initiatives of the Discussion and Analytical Society Liberal Club. And then their interventions will be of 5 minutes. And then we will also have a panel of discussants. So let me introduce them. We have Antonio Miloshoski, the head of 2012 OSCE ODIHR election observation mission to parliamentary elections in Belarus. We have Dr. Anais Marin, the researcher from the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. We have Olga Stuzhinskaya, the director of the Brussels-based Office for Democratic Belarus. We have Katia Glod, the non-resident fellow, Academy of Leadership in the Royal Institute of International Affairs, London, UK. And we have Yauheni, the project director from Freedom House, Vilnius. In fact, we all know when in the past year, when we find ourselves at the discussions devoted to the Eastern Partnership, and when the talk is about Belarus, there is indeed little to say. There is this kind of sense of fatigue among all of us, and on the European side in particular, when the representatives of the European Union and of from the western part of the world say that the EU has tried all. EU has tried engagement, EU has tried sanctions, and nothing really works with the Belarusian regime. So, and it leads to the fact that Belarus is actually getting lower and lower among the priorities of the EU foreign policy, while the European Union prefers to concentrate its efforts and attention on the countries where the governments are more inclined towards European integration and closer relationship with the European Union. However, recently, so basically, as a result of these these circles of engagement and sanctions, they repeat from time to time, and this whole situation is a result of these cycles, which remind us more of a vicious circle. However, if we want to move forward, we need to understand why this is the case. And today, also during the conference, when the talk was about Ukraine, many mentioned that we need to be cautious so that Ukraine would not become like a second Belarus. So the aim of today's talk is not to really define the situation in EU-Belarus relations, as we all know that is quite difficult and complicated, but try to identify why this is the case. And this, I hope, will allow us to see if there is a chance to break this vicious circle of sanctions and engagement. Thank you very much. I will not take more of your time. 5 minutes for our key speakers first, and then 3 minutes for the discussants, and then I hope we will have a little time for Q&A session. Thank you.
Can we go first?
Andrew, please.
Okay, I don't have a speech, but Xenia asked me to address a couple of questions. EU-Belarusian relations and sanctions. Well, nothing much has changed in Belarus since 2 key events. One of those was the last elections and the subsequent crackdown. The second was Russia's bailout of the Belarusian economy in November 2011. Before that bailout, the economy was showing real severe signs of strain. It wasn't that Russia wasn't providing any money or support, but it was just being a bit more kudronist about it. It was a more utilitarian. There was a kind of general squeeze in order to try and target certain assets. But for whatever reason, and one of the reasons it says that Kudrin was temporarily out of the picture in November 2011, another is election sequencing. This was after Putin had announced his return as president, but before the protests in Russia. But since then, Russia has been very generous. We have constant struggle over the amount of subsidy and the kind of rent-seeking therefrom. But so long as that flow of money or something similar is in place, the Belarusian economy, which isn't self-sustaining, survives. And whatever the Belarusian authorities do with the EU is simply in order to recalibrate that primary relationship, to try and get something more out of the Russians. So, as long as that's the reality, it's difficult to make headway. Second point, though, about sanctions. Hard and soft power. Russia is, it's fashionable to talk about Russian soft power. Russia doesn't understand what soft power is, it's pretty bad at soft power. The EU, on the other hand, is pretty bad at hard power. We are far too quick to assume that sanctions don't work. They do work if you pursue them properly. There is an art of doing that. From the kind of sanctions against Iraq in Saddam Hussein's day, there were some very interesting academic studies about displacement and about how elites often benefit from sanctions. You know, so there's been something of a learning process. Ironically, it might actually be easier to target Ukraine. Because Ukraine has an oligarchy, it has a president, both of whom have money in the West. We know where a lot of that money is, we're simply not policing it in the way that we should be. Clearly, Belarus does not have an oligarchy in the same sense. There are some members of the elite with money abroad. We've tried to target that. But really, this is kind of imposing a kind of Ukrainian understanding on the Belarusian situation. Right? Looking at the so-called oligarchs and the props of the regime. If we're serious, we target oil. If we want it, in some ways, half sanctions are worse than none. It's best to be serious if you start the process. There are obstructive particular interests within the EU, particular countries, particular commercial interests, and a particular problem, which some of the Belarusians may talk more about who has responsibility for export of refined oil. Certain Russian interests close to President Putin. So that's a sensitive problem. But to connect the 2 points, the EU has not had leverage since November 2012 because Russian support is more generous and less conditional than it was. We won't really have leverage until that changes. That's the bigger picture. We can talk about the smaller picture. There are some other areas, smaller areas where we have leverage, but we don't have the big leverage that we might have had if circumstances were different, and that we might have if we were serious about sanctions.
This is perfect timing, Andrew. Thank you very much. Dr. Kizima, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, if you describe the situation right at the moment, so we have mostly not a troubled situation with human rights in the Republic of Belarus, but mostly discrimination against the Republic of Belarus. Because Brussels and Washington are sure that such weak economy, such small country with just 10 million population has no right for their own policy, for their own political orientation. It should be subordinated to Brussels and Washington or die. Which is quite simple to understand if we make some examples. From 2003, we were said from the side of the European Union that Georgia creating new democracy. It is very good for the Belarusian government to follow Georgia in making such kind of democracy as Georgia has. But last year, 12 months ago, new Georgian government said openly that for 2012, 180 political prisoners were in Georgia, and most of them were freed from German prisons from that moment. So the main questions: why for 9 years more than 180 political prisoners were in Georgia and nobody in Brussels discussed that very sad situation with political rights, with freedoms of human rights and so on in Georgia. Only discussed that in Belarus there is 30, 20, 12 and any other amount of political prisoners. Nobody was interested in 180 prisoners in Georgia. So I think that discrimination is quite clear. Such participant of Eastern Partnership at Georgia, because of its anti-Russian orientation, had no troubles with any amount of political prisoners, which they declared such by the government in 2012. In case of Belarus, it was necessary to find any political prisoners at all because of pro-Russian orientation. So the question of human rights violation, it is not questions of human rights, it is question of geopolitical orientation. Are you pro-Russian or anti-Russian? Enough examples, a lot of them, head of Politburo, Chinese Politburo, nobody at any kind of elections said that he is a democratic president of China. Anytime he wants, he will be welcomed in the European Union and Washington, and nobody will ask about any human rights violations. They will ask how much money you are able to invest in Germany, in Croatia, and so on, in Lithuania, if he will be able to find the time to attend that countries. Nobody is interested. Absolute power of King of Saudi Arabia makes him very welcome in the European Union and in the United States of America. But regularly elected president of Belarus, with regularly elected parliament in that republic, is not able to attend because he is undemocratic. So this is a clear case of discrimination. If in case of Belarus or Georgia, this is question of geopolitical orientation. In case of Russia, for example, China, Saudi Arabia, and so on, this is a question of importance. Do you have oil? Do you have nuclear weapon? Do you have investment for our countries? In that case, of course, we will not discuss any sanctions against you. We will provide you a lot of opportunities to cooperate with us. We have no oil, we have no big economy. We are not big to be important for the European Union, only as a province for the European Union, not more. We are even not invited to be a member of the European Union, but we have a lot of sanctions from the side of the European Union. So the first recommendation to stop such problematic situation of the European Union with the Republic of Belarus is to stop discrimination. If Azerbaijan, of course, very democratic country, has 10 deputies in Euronest and Belarus hasn't, this is clear case of discrimination. This is case of oil, of course, not about human rights situation in Azerbaijan and in the Republic of Belarus. The second recommendation after you stop discrimination, it is necessary to say truly about good things that Belarus has, and Belarus really has a lot of good things. For example, one of the human rights organizations several days ago said that in New York, 20% of children has not enough food regularly. They has not enough food in one of the biggest democratic economies of the world. Belarus regularly in 5-10 countries which most provided by food children in the world, with the United Nations statistics. Barack Obama, President of the United States, said openly in January that only 3 of 10 American children is able to attend kindergarten because $1,000 is too much even for many people from middle class. 95% of Belarusian children regularly attend kindergarten, and contrary to the United States of America, which is not to attend, which is also 4 times food for $30 a month. And a lot of other good things in Belarus that nobody knows because Western mass media don't say about that. So if you stop discrimination, if you start to say good things that we have in our country, it is a good way to start talks about progress in European Union and Republic of Belarus relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kizima, and the floor is up to Yauheni.
Thank you very much. Let me offer my answers as how to break the vicious circle, if it can be broken, of course. And I'll try to draw a slightly bigger picture and be a little bit provocative. It's true that in discussions with European diplomats and politicians, you all the time hear this: look, we've tried everything, nothing works. And it's true, everything has been tried. But I think that while trying everything, the EU's policy has ignored one, probably most fundamental problem related to Belarus. And the problem is that the Belarusian reality, unfortunately, lacks a strong political actor that sees democracy, market economy, market reform, or European integration as its political priorities. Apart from that, the Belarusian reality lacks strong and influential societal stakeholders that could support a political actor that would promote the idea of democracy, reform, and European integration. And this, I think, has very strong practical implications. First of all, the implication is that in such a reality there can be no quick change in Belarus. No matter what we do, there can be no quick change. Secondly, the enlargement modeled policy of conditionality that the EU uses not only towards Belarus but towards the whole region is very limited in its potential impacts on the country. And finally, swinging from sanctions to engagement doesn't work in this situation. And if we look back at what was the case for the last 10 years, we can clearly see this swinging policy. 2-3 years of sanctions, or half sanctions, that's also a different question, and then 2-3 years of different things that are called engagement. And I'll skip some of the arguments here. By the way, we have policy memos there where everything I'm talking about is described in more detail. But let me go directly to some, let's say, ideas that might help. And that they might sound a little bit provocative, as I said, but I think if we take into account the factor of the political actor who is absent from the Belarusian reality, this is quite important. So first of all, I think that European decision makers need to accept the fact that quick change is impossible in Belarus. And quick thinking or short-term thinking, which is usually tied to political cycles, is basically wasting time and effort in Belarus. Secondly, a sustainable and qualitative change will only be possible in Belarus once we get this strong political actor who will be promoting European values, European integration, democracy, market economy. Therefore, the EU's policy has to somehow try to develop those stakeholders, and the stakeholders in their turn will demand a political actor. Thirdly, sanctions. Well, that's of course a very long discussion. We have had this discussion for a number of years in Belarus. But it looks like in the Belarusian realities, sanctions at least do not help to create stakeholders that would promote European integration, that would demand an establishment of a strong political actor. So it looks like the EU has to somehow minimize the use of sanctions in Belarus. An engagement strategy cannot deliver quick results either. But if this engagement strategy is used consistently, then at least theoretically this is the only approach that might deliver in terms of creating those stakeholders that I'm talking about. And here I'm talking about broad engagement. It's not just, visiting official Minsk and talking to bureaucrats. Broad engagement. And here we don't have any new recipes. The ideas are all there. The only recipe is to implement that consistently. Some of the ideas might include very well-known things: intensified sectoral cooperation, technical dialogue between experts and even state officials, facilitation of more professional exchange, more trade, more commercial activities. This is crucial. More student programs in Belarus, first of all, and then somewhere, importing Belarusians to the EU. It's better to import people from the EU and their values to Belarus. For instance, professors lecture in Belarusian universities on issues of European integration. And more cross-border initiatives. Finally, in order to make a strategy of long-term broad engagement work, the overall relationship, I think, has to be inoculated against the risks of day-to-day politics. In other words, the whole relationship should not depend exclusively on the behavior or mood of just a couple of politicians on both sides, or just one politician in Belarus. This is not to say that the EU has to smile whenever the Belarusian regime cracks down on the people in the country, but at least some way should be found to make sure that the behavior of the authorities in Minsk do not predetermine the relationship with the whole spectrum of Belarusian society. And this should also be applied to all the programs, including this dialogue of modernization, which has been quite an anecdote so far.
Thank you very much, Yauheni. Actually, just if I may make a small comment on that, I would say that the behavior of the of one person in Minsk should not actually define perhaps the strategy of the European Union towards Belarus. But let's now give the floor to our discussants. And first, please, Antonio Miloshoski, the floor is yours for 3 minutes. Looking forward to your thoughts.
Thank you. First, thank you for inviting me and giving this opportunity. 3 minutes for Belarus, really a short time, but I will give you my impression as a head of the electoral mission in Belarus 2012. First of all, I would like to say that those who are trying to compare their own country with the standards of Saudi Arabia and Azerbaijan, they are trying to find excuses, not reasons for upgrading and having a more progressive society. I'm coming also from a small country, from Macedonia, and we are not perfect, we have many shortcomings, but we are trying to compare our system with that of Slovenia, Austria, Italy, Lithuania, Poland, Germany, etc. So, in that sense, I think that in Belarusian political elite establishment, there is a need to make a shift and trying to make society more progressive. Concerning the elections in Belarus, I would say a few things. First, what we have concluded, it was that in Belarus there is no full right of association. So in that sense there are really many constraints and big pressure. Although if you read the papers and the law, you will find the law and the letter not wrong, but the implementation, the spirit and the way how it is conducted, it's giving this conclusion. Second, there is no free right for being a candidate, to stand as a candidate for member in the parliament, candidate for president, for mayor. And by the time when we were conducting the observation, many influential political figures that might have played a role in their communities or in the elections were still imprisoned, and many of them who were not allowed to run as candidates. So in that sense, I think it's a really a substantial shortcoming. And finally, the State Electoral Committee is not impartial. The State Electoral Committee is not impartial. And just to give you one example, maybe you have heard, maybe you have witnessed from those who are coming from Belarus, this momentum of the elections named silent counting. I have witnessed myself, and it's really more theater than elections, because whatever you have invested as a politician, and because I'm a politician myself, in your campaign, in attracting more people to support you, to vote for you, then at the end it depends on the 10 people who are 10 meters away from you, and you are not allowed to witness the counting, and they are just silent and giving some numbers that are then publicly announced or issued just weeks after the elections, after everything is settled according to the desired mathematics. So in that sense, concerning the elections, and in that sense concerning the capacity of the society to offer an alternative and to widen the scope of the political options in the country, if I can give a recommendation to the European Union or Brussels or whatever entity we will name, it is some kind of trade-off, some kind of negotiations with the issue of sanctions and the issue of the electoral system. Concerning the parliamentary elections, Belarus needs, desperately needs, not a majority, but a proportional electoral model. And even by that electoral model there will be probably some frauds, but then there will be a chance for the opposition. Because out of 110 candidates, 109 in 2012 were from the Belarus coalition and alliance, and the only one that had chances to win in one electoral unit, at that unit the elections were dismissed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonia Miloshoski. Now the floor is to Dr. Anais Marin, please.
Thank you. 3 minutes is indeed very short, so I will pick up on what Yauheni stopped on, because I feel really we share the same views here, and I would just argue that actually there is one thing that hasn't been tried, as far as I know. It's actually what I call a third track, because we know that both tracks have led nowhere, that swinging from sanctions to engagement neither, and opening a third track, I will explain briefly what I mean here. It's something I've been arguing for a while already, and it's been in the Belarusian media, and it earned me a lot of criticism, but still. The European dialogue for modernization could have been such a third track. Unfortunately, there was just one important missing link, is that the official Minsk was not invited. I'm among the people who think that without engaging the bureaucracy, I'm not talking about shaking the hand of Mr. Lukashenko, but engaging this 1 million people who constitute the Belarusian bureaucracy, you cannot go anywhere, even in a democratic context. Whenever it will happen in Belarus, no change can be implemented without their participation. So dialoguing with people who are like-minded is interesting, but it doesn't go anywhere in terms of initiatives. Therefore, I believe it's more than time for the EU to try and convince the unconvinced who are having doubts about a number of things these days, about the sustainability of the economic system, and about the outcome of further integration with Russia. So based on this, what I recommend is to use some rhetorical tricks. For example, pick up on such words as constructive dialogue, because it is a constructive step towards Belarus to say that we, yes, are willing to engage on a number of very specific issues. Technical issues, where anyway cooperation, dialogue is already taking place, and based not on a strict conditionality, but at least on principles. And here the EU would have to learn to step back and put as a central principle the idea that it will discuss roadmaps for gradual transformation with a coalition of people made up of representatives from the civil society and representatives from the administration who are eventually tired of the system and knowingly, aware of the fact that it has to be reformed, at least partially. And to hold this system accountable, one has to mobilize the local population so that it holds the authorities accountable to deliver on a number of reforms. And to do that, it has to be a depoliticized dialogue on technical issues and on things that people are interested in. And I'm not sure democratization is what really they want, but there are a number of entry points that should be explored. Cross-border cooperation is one of them. Very small, low-level issues, World Heritage Site management, development of tourism, these kind of things which in principle do not raise strong resistance on the part of the authorities.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Olga Stuzhinskaya.
Thank you, Kenya. I think what I will say very much goes in line with what Yauheni and Anais have been saying, but before that I would like to pick up on the comment what Kenya made before about the Ukraine, that there are now messages that one should avoid the repetition of situation of Ukraine with Belarus. And moreover, what I found very interesting at the conference which I'm attending that the representative of the Ukrainian think tank said that we want to avoid marginalization of Ukraine, and thus we want to keep the communication channels open with everyone in the country. The government, the civil society, and many, many other actors. I think that's precisely the mistake that was made with Belarus. And I agree that it does not mean in practical terms that you go and shake hands with Lukashenko, indeed, but you do engage with people in the government. Then I think there will be clearly a rethink of policy on the whole Eastern Partnership. Before, it was only Belarus, which was sort of a black sheep of the region. Now it's not longer so. And what I could say when crafting this new approach towards Belarus, what one should pay attention to. There is a question of values, and the research which we just commissioned recently, the Office for Democratic Belarus, has very much shown that the understanding of what is important, what values are important for people in our country, is quite different from that in the EU. For Belarusians, number one issue, what was important, was stability, and that's what the government has picked up very well. Not the EU, not our political parties. Stability and economic stability. While they see EU as a liberal entity, they understand that human rights matter there, but for their own, the national values are quite different. That's something that has to be kept in mind. And that's where this misunderstanding and languages always come from, because the EU was the policy based around its values, talks to a country which has a completely different set of values, so the message does not find a recipient. And there was a very good article on Ukraine recently where this was also mentioned as a case, this difference in languages and messages is going, not matching. I fully agree with what Yauheni was saying on reforms, on all the tools that can be used. What is important is really to work on the change of mindset of people, on changes in political elites, the way people think, education of reforms. I think one of the key fields where more effort can be put, and it's the opportunity for Belarusians to go abroad and study and receive Western education should be complemented by tools in the country, by reforms that take place there. Because we all know that most of the students who leave Belarus, they never come back. Plus, of course, what is important, more presence and more visibility of the EU in general. Those would probably be my points.
Thank you. Thank you, Olga. Katia, Glod, please.
Thank you very much, Ksenia. I think we all can relate here to what Yauheni and others have said, that indeed we should have the focus on the development of pro-European stakeholders in Belarus. We need to focus on this broad engagement and mobilization of society. But what I would like to pick up on is perhaps Andrew's points which he has made about the economy and about the fact that, you know, nothing basically has changed since 2010 and that Russian support bailout is there. And I think actually we are seeing certain changes now. And in terms of economy, I think it's, you know, it's very different from how it was before, even a year ago. I think, yeah, it's really the time when this Lukashenko's model, you know, Soviet-based administrative economy has exhausted its potential, and there is really nothing else what he can use and what is available to improve the economic situation. I think we are seeing a lot of trends which we saw on the eve of 2011 financial crisis. There is a widening current account deficit, the merchandise trade deficit I think now is about $3 billion. Foreign currency reserves are shrinking. Next year economists say we will need at least $9 billion because this is the highest year in terms of repayment of external debt, and the current account balances deficit is supposed to reach about $6 billion. Even though the salaries are going up, prices are also going up constantly. I think people are also very much disappointed, because if before they could say that, okay, I mean, our salaries are going up, now, I mean, with all these tariffs, with all the utility bills, with the transportation tariffs, which have to go up, and they are going up in Belarus. People are really not coping. So therefore, I think this economic situation is actually impacting now very differently on the current situation, on the political situation in Belarus, and perhaps it also creates a different reality for the European Union and for the engagement of the European Union in Belarus. In my view, the next presidential election will be very much about the economy, and again, I mean, this is a very good chance for the opposition to basically use this chance and to propose the alternative, because people, I think, are as dissatisfied as they have never been before. I mean, again, what I have said already, that the current model is basically falling apart, and Lukashenko, he's not understanding the market economy. He does not know how to do it. He doesn't know what else can be done, and therefore we hear all this very extreme rhetoric, when he is trying whatever to cut off heads of the officials. And because he is really seeing that nothing is working, and the recent modernization projects, they have indeed been a complete failure. So, all in all, I think we are now seeing different reality. Russia is not really there so much to support Belarus as it did in the past. It's, for example, not providing as much crude, as much oil as it had, as Belarus had expected to receive. So we are, whatever, expecting about 3 million tons crude less than had been expected, which would result in about, $2 billion, $1.5 billion losses for the Belarusian budget. And Russian economy is stagnating, so where would the money come from? And indeed, Belarusian economy is not self-sustainable, and therefore this, I think, will have a very strong impact on the next presidential election, and it will be held in a different environment. And therefore, I think, it's a good time for the opposition and for the European Union to reconsider the policies and the tactics, because they may bring different results in a few years' time.
Thank you. Thank you, Katia. And please, Vitis Yurkonis, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, really, the whole title of the discussion, talking about the vicious circle, means that we are talking about the closed environment, about the closed country, the regime country. That's the term which is in contrary to the open, transparent system. So that's Belarus, and you are right. And then the question, who is in charge of that vicious circle? And definitely we presume that Belarus is a sovereign country, and if it is, so you need to blame the authorities, not the external actors, because everybody here would agree that you cannot impose the change being an external actor. So, well, the ball is really on the side of the authorities. But well, all these tools that you could do some technical work, well, it's happening. There's the cooperation in the border management, there's technical cooperation, even the trade is growing between Belarus and EU countries. So, of course, we can discuss the level of cooperation, but it's just hypocritical to say that there are no ties with Brussels. So, and then there's a question whether Brussels is paying enough attention to Belarus. I think there's enough of talks about Belarus, and there were a lot of attempts to actually do something about Belarus, but is there any improvement inside Belarus? And then again, a question, any sign of willingness from Minsk actually even to cooperate on some technical issues? I would just, as a Lithuanian, mention one issue, Astravets nuclear power plant, and that's enough. So, well, what could we do, as Brussels, as EU, international community? So one thing, of course, this model of more for more, should apply, especially regarding the authorities. If there is a progress, we can engage more. More for less should be also considered, but only when it comes to the people. And of course, the third issue, we should avoid the hypocrisy dealing with the regime. I would, of course, agree that you have, well, Minister Sikorsky said that, yes, we do have some certain level of double standards in the Eastern Partnership policy, so we have to tune that. But well, I would like to see Mr. Kizima going to Baku or going to Beijing or going to Moscow and saying, you are the dictatorship, and like, well, we'll see how that would go. So then there's a question whether Belarus is really discriminated. So we can ask about the definition. Do we have free and fair elections? No. Do we have political prisoners in the country? How many? It doesn't matter. I mean, the question, do we have political prisoners? Yes, we do. Independent media? No, we don't have. It's in exile or mainly online. Do we have civil society environment? It's basically operating underground. Independent judicial system? No. So, definition, Belarus is a dictatorship. And yes, I agree, a poor, barely surviving, dependent from Russia dictatorship. And that we should not invent any other vocabulary. And if we need change, if we are about changing the whole relationship, I think that sustainable change would happen only if fundamental freedoms are in place. We cannot bypass them, so, and definitely you cannot buy change. Therefore, it's not only about trade, economy, technical cooperation, it's about democratic change, and that's a question for the authorities, whether they are willing to change that.
Thank you very much, Vitis, and thanks a lot to all the discussants and to the speakers. And now we still have some time for a short question and answer session. So if there are any questions, you have the opportunity to take the floor now and to address, please, to who you would like to answer this question. Please.
Hi, my name is Vasily and I'm one of the volunteers for the BĽRoom, and this is a question for Vitis. If this definition that you propose to Belarus is in fact true, then would that be the case given what is happening in the other room right now? Because in my opinion, many of the organizations that are featured there and the work that they do suggest that using black and white terminology on both sides by Belarusian government and by the EU, including the specific politicians, may not be the best solution to break the vicious circle.
Okay, so the very fact that the BĽRoom is there, not in Minsk, or the Minsk forum happened a month ago, and it happened in Vilnius, not in Minsk, it's just self-explanatory that we have we don't have a free environment in Belarus, and we have a dictatorship. Therefore, a lot of grassroots organizations are operating, actually registered here. They do operate there on the underground environment, and that's the thing. I mean, we shouldn't invent I mean, it's still possible to operate in Belarus, and of course the regime is very selective when it comes to some certain people. I'm not excluding, and that's the best thing. I'm saying more for less. For the people, for the civil society, and that's how you break the vicious circle.
There was...
Людмила Грязнова, Human Rights Alliance, Belarus. I think it's necessary to depoliticize dialogue between European Union and Belarus. And I agree with Yauheni, Olga, and Finnish representative. It's necessary to find other agents with whom we can speak and say about European Union interests and so on. Not only with government, not only with the authority. We have many actors from different fields in education, in science, in many other spheres, and million people who are really thinks as European people in Belarus too, and we are not dictatorship really. I'm human rights activist for many years, and I understand there are many problems in different countries, not only in Belarus, in Russia too, in Azerbaijan too, and so. But if we put human rights issue on the first place, and if we overestimate the real situation in this field, we stop the Europeanization of Belarus. And it is not fruitful step. It's necessary to find another steps in order to involve Belarus in the European Union.
So it was more of a comment rather than, than a question. Yes, Andrei, please.
I have a both comment question. Comment is very short because if you're saying about depolitization of dialogue, then the question, what is the goal of this dialogue? I mean, I'm not saying I'm against, but then let's be honest about the goals we set up, because from you or from like politicians we hear the goal is democratize Belarus, bring it to European family, and we want to have it so fast in the next 3 years or next 5 years or maybe next presidential election. And then at the end we say, oh, let's not politicize it, you know. So then maybe we should be honest from the very beginning, saying yes, we're not politicizing it. It takes time, maybe not one time, not like 1 year, maybe it takes 7, 10 years, or 20, or 30, or 40, and there is a road. But if there is a road, show us road map. And what is a road map? Then let's discuss about this. Maybe this can be kind of, you know, new way, you know, of thinking. That there is no fast result of human rights issues, of really bringing Belarus to European Union. Even we all here, I think, would love to see it tomorrow, you know, and then we can talk about those actors. But, and my question then to Anais and to Antonio, you all talk about that we need to talk to government. I mean, I fully agree, but what should we do if government doesn't want to talk to you? And I think this is the situation today. It looks like EU staying near the government trying to pull it, you know, you say, oh, please talk to us about anything, whatever. The weather, great. There is a great weather. Fine, we have dialogue. No. I mean, that's my question. About what should be dialogue real with government today, you think so? How you can really, as EU, can really attract the government to this kind of dialogue? And what kind of a goal should be real for this kind of dialogue? And my second question is, are any unilateral steps that can be taken today by EU towards Belarusian people? Because first we're talking about visa issue, I don't know for how many years now, and now we have a clear answer. Sorry, it's bilateral decision, we can just wait. So do you know maybe what kind of unilateral decision can be taken by EU, not waiting for Lukashenko? And people in Belarus can feel that EU is really open. Thank you.
Please. Okay. Of course, we're not going to talk about the weather, but the important thing, I think, is that the dialogue be not between Minsk and Brussels. Причем здесь Brussels is something I very often hear. The important dialogue that is missing in Belarus these days is between the state and society. So the EU can, again, step back and be a facilitator, an inspirator. It has put keywords on the table. Roadmap is one of them. The government picked up on that already during the very beginning of the Eastern Partnership, made propositions that were not listened to in Brussels. So we could start back from there and encourage all in these technical sectoral fields, all those who already have thought about it, civil society organizations, opposition parties, anybody, people within the ministries, to come back to the table and discuss what they want. The goal is to reform what doesn't work, and I'm sure there will be like-minded people in the administration and in the opposition even to agree that a number of things don't work and should be reformed. Regarding the step, thank you for asking this question, you'll be happy about the answer. Of course, there is a unilateral step, is to liberalize the visa regime without expecting that the equivalent be done by the Belarusian authorities. There is room for maneuver there, both in legislative terms within the framework of the Schengen Agreement, and there is a lot of room for political will. And Madam, I'm not Finnish, I'm actually French, and I'm looking forward to hear from my government some good news if ever they pay attention a bit more to what's going on in Belarus.
Would you like to?
Yes, shortly. First, I agree with this about the visa liberalization, because if the European Union wants to give more for less, and if the intention is not to the whole country and the population to be collateral damage as well because of the positions towards the authorities, then I think that the visa liberalization for students, for all citizens, temporarily for certain professionals, I don't know to what extent, but could be something that should be considered before and after next presidential elections. So, but that should be clearly stated, and in that sense, I think that what is missing now, we are sometimes criticizing or considering whether the Belarusian opposition parties or groups or NGOs are united in their goal, but at the same time we must know that within the European Union itself the member states are not united as well when building up certain policies towards countries like Belarus. And considering your comment, I agree fully. I belong to those people who think that it's not possible to expect political reforms without politicizing the dialogue with the authorities in Minsk. And it's not possible to have, I don't know, some fair or a mirror or free and fair election results on the next presidential elections if you don't reform the electoral system and you don't have an independent system for electing people, an independent judiciary and an independent public prosecutor. The situation in economy may turn even worse from today, tomorrow, after tomorrow. I don't wish that, but let's imagine. And majority of the people could be really dissatisfied with the current government. But then, if you vote, but I'm counting the votes, it's not about your voting, but it's about my counting.
Thank you. Olga, also, Yevgeny was first, and then to make a comment, and then.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we certainly become visa freaks or visa psychos. For the last 10 years, any discussion ends with this visa issue. But I think what the EU can do unilaterally, it can start looking at Belarus and seeing not just one guy with mustache, but the whole country. And this sounds like a vague concept, but behind that, I mean, instead of focusing on visas as a means of extraordinary help to Belarusians, you can just start looking at Belarus as a normal country, leave politics aside, and try to create programs where more Europeans come to Belarus. We'll see what the Ice Hockey World Cup will bring, apart from the Russians drinking beer. But hopefully there will be some Europeans, you know, disseminating values, among other things.
My comment was also on visas, and Minister Sikorsky today in the conference very clearly said there will be no exceptions. That in order to proceed somehow there has to be the readmission agreement in place, which has to be done with the government of Belarus. So this is probably, sorry for the bad news.
No.
And to pick up on the issue that Anais,
Waiving visa fees is always possible.
indeed, but
We all in this room have no problems with visas.
and to pick up on the dialogue, on this multi-stakeholder dialogues in the country, I think today there is more room than there was before for these dialogues. As long as there are issues of mutual interest, people do come together. And I can speak from the experience of my organization, which organizes these meetings in different sectors. There is interest on the side of some government institutions to engage with this dialogue, and I think this platform should be used more.
Thank you. We still have time for one last two. Okay. Yevgeny is in charge of the timing. Two last questions, and there was this young gentleman there. Please.
Thank you. My name is Preiherman, and I am an independent journalist from Minsk, and here we do exist. Therefore, my question is, as it might be to get to Mr. Yauheni, who was speaking the last. You've said in your speech that we are a dictatorship, basically, that Belarus is a dictatorship, which I think, I presume nobody here disagrees with. You've also mentioned what should we become. You said that we should become democracy, which I also presume is quite obvious as well. You've also said that we should not be, I mean, the EU should not be hypocritic and so on and so forth, which a little bit trespasses with what Professor Kizima has mentioned. But still, you haven't addressed the issue that most of the panelists did, and that is what is the right approach to democratize the country? What is it? And by the way, and I don't mean just naming it, but also give some evidence that it works indeed.
Well, the one thing is that I said that more for less when it comes to the people, and that would be like, I'm still a believer that easing the travel, the people-to-people contacts would be a long-term endeavor, but it is possible. I mean, just look at the panelists. Some of them are the beneficiaries of the EU support, or they are residents, like they are working, or they are used to study in EU, and that is working. They are speaking freely here. Sometimes they can organize meetings inside Belarus, and that is millimeter after millimeter, like the transformation of the society. And then there could be a question back to you asking, like, so what kind of engagement worked? And I would have a list of technical issues where Belarus didn't participate, they haven't been engaged just because they were not willing to. So anyone who asks the question, say, or proposes to engage with the government, I would say, whom? Of course, not the guy with the mustache. So whom precisely? Namely the guy who is willing and who would be taking charge, who would be in charge of the dialogue with Brussels.
So your proposal towards the government? Towards the government?
I said, more for more with the authorities, more for less with the people. That's the formula.
Thank you. And our final question, please.
Yeah, I would like to address Anastasia, am I right? I would like to ask Dr. Andrew Wilson. You mentioned Iraqi case about the sanctions against Iraq, and I'm a bit surprised that you kind of mentioned it as a successful case, because if you're aware that how much Iraqi population actually suffered from that, and there was even claims of genocide in front of Iraqi population in that case. But I would like to hear more from your perspective. How would you see imposing sanctions against Belarusian regime, right? In this context, what EU, how do you see EU getting harsher on Belarusian regime, and what tools and what mechanisms would you propose? Thank you.
Well, two questions. The first, no, I mean, Iraq was a successful learning experience.
Oh.
Both in terms in how you might try and avoid or minimise that collateral damage, and also in terms of observing sanctions gaming, the way that certain elites benefit from shortages that are being created by sanctions, and how you try and avoid that. Learning from the mistakes thereof, very much. Well, I don't have much to add to what I said at the top. I don't think targeting the model that the EU started with, targeting the props of the regime, the Belarus financiers, is particularly effective, because that's basically a misreading of the type of people they are. You don't have oligarchs. You have plenty of rich people in Belarus, but they tend to be managers, renters on behalf of the regime. So that was never going to work.
Belarus.
It's an open question whether we do want to be more serious about sanctions. I was saying if we did, then it was clear where we go, which is with oil. That that would raise the stakes. Whether we want to do that is an open question. It would also raise the stakes with Russia because of certain Russian interests that are involved in the export, which is why a lot of people wouldn't want to do it. Logically, that would be the way to go. Whether we want to do that, though, is another question.
Thank you.
А можно мне одну маленькую
Well, if just very brief one.
Уважаемые дамы и господа,
Oui, but...
не кажется ли нам всем, что мы не можем найти решение, потому что мы ищем новое решение в старом порядке?
I will just maybe translate it in English because the language, the working language is English. Basically, the comment is, aren't we trying to find a new solution within the old order? And basically, yes. And I would say that the whole idea of this event and the whole of this talk was about to actually discuss and try to see what can be done given the old order, recognizing the situation, not taking it as it is, taking the reality, and then trying to see whether something can be done. I should finish. I'm sorry. We are running out of time. Just a few words to finish this discussion. I should definitely thank all the participants, our discussants, our speakers. The program of these days is very packed, and I'm really thankful that all of you found time to come here and to talk about Belarus. I should also have given a bit of background in the beginning, because I mentioned that Belarus is not really on the focus of the EU agenda. This is why we thought this event should still take place, and we should still have a policy discussion on Belarus on these days during the Eastern Partnership Summit. And here I should also mention Edward Lucas, the international editor of The Economist, who supported this idea from the very beginning. He actually inspired us to organize this event, so I should thank him for this support as well. So thanks a lot to everyone, and just to finish, my finishing remark would be one of the distinguished experts from Chatham House, actually James Nixie. We were also discussing the EU-Belarus relations with him, and I also told him about this event and what he told me to remember, and I think it's a good final point for our discussion. Einstein's definition of insanity is that insanity is trying to do things again and again, the same thing again and again, expecting to get a different result. So this is some food for thought for all of us. Thank you very much.